Hello, Dr. Sanders, and welcome to our presentation on NCAA ranked some rankings, cross country, and the probability of finding social choice violations. So, as an introduction, you probably know what ranked sum scoring is. It's basically taking the place of each element or each event, adding them together, and then the lowest number wins. So, like each event, if you get first place, you get one, second place, you get two, third place, you get three, so on and so forth. And then you add all the elements together, and whoever has the lowest points wins. And that happens in NCAA cross country, as you might already know. The thing that really stands out was the probability of finding social choice violations in cross country when comparing an unrelated group from one group to another. And what your research does is basically taking combinatorial algorithms, but also incorporating new empirical algorithms, which makes this novel and new to determine the chance for social choice violations in this type of scoring in rank sum scoring, especially in the NCAA cross country format. And now let's get started.
So for independence of irrelevant groups, or IIG, it is crucial to maintaining fair rankings. And in the IIG, there are two types of violations, one being weak violations and the other type being strong. So a weak violation occurs when, for example, if A and B are equally ranked without C, but including C makes one score higher than the other, then this constitutes a weak violation. So the ranking must be in between A and B, regardless of whether C is included or excluded. And the ranking should not be influenced by outcomes of other outside groupings. And it is imperative that these violations do not occur because of the integrity of rankings. Now, moving on to the strong violations is when it happens when adding or removing an irrelevant group, for example, being group C, is going to reverse the ranking order of A and B. This is obviously going to be more severe because there's going to be increased instability in the ranking systems, and there's obviously going to be a loss of credibility. And overall, rankings should be independent from outside influence, obviously, because shown through the weak and strong violations in the independence of irrelevant groups. Now for transitivity and rank sum scoring, it ensures that the ranking system is logically ranked. If, for example, Z1 is ranked higher than Z2 and Z2 is ranked higher than Z3, then with this ranking system, that Z1 should be higher than Z3. Now, for example, if there was any violation in the system, then the overall credibility of the system would be in doubt, and only strong violations from Section 2.1 are considered due to making the pairwise rank sum violations impossible.
So in section 2.3, oh yeah, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Bhuvanesh. But in section 2.3, there's a new novel algorithm that was introduced. What really made this a new research paper off of past beliefs to determine social choice violations. So they used insight from before and past NCAA or past social choice violation determining principles to make the process of determining social choice violations more efficient and faster. So one of the main things why the algorithm was more efficient was the ability to determine that it was redundant, right? Being able to disregard elements that are transports allows the algorithm to focus on smaller subset sections of a subset to determine violations, which makes it faster and more accurate. So you're disregarding all the unnecessary information that are redundant, and you're specifying on the new information that nobody was that only needs to be focused on because there's multiple replicas and you only need to focus on the new one to determine violations. So to create a non-redundant sequence for consideration, we only work with the first element of A or another group. And the same applies to the next elements. Cases that are exploited can be included and redundant can be disincluded. So then continued exploitation is done until all redundancies are exhausted and you only have novel novel sequences which you're able to employ social choice violation determining in your algorithms. So, and then using the formula below, using all the combination of sequences to be able to see the percentage of social choice violation it has on NCAA cross country, on NCAA cross country championships, which will be gone over in our data and conclusion standpoint. Thanks. So now on to theorems that talked about the prevention or that talked about like the possibility of not having the social choice violations or specifically the violation of transitivity. So first with theorem 1, redundancy. So speaking from the slide, with n groups, only 1 over 2n of all possible outcomes need to be considered for the case of overcounting. So when talking about redundancy, which was in 2.3, we only need to look at 1/6 of the actual data set because there's multiple repeated elements in every sequence. So we only have to look at 1/6, and when we see that one team will always beat the other team, in other sequences, two teams must lose to the others, or at least one team may lose to the others. So that shows the pre-existence of the cycles and shows that there's no chance of overcounting or any violation because of that overcount. So theorem number 2, insurmountable leads. So speaking from the slide again, if n plus 1 over 2 elements rank over the others, that set of elements will defeat the rest. So in a 3-group outcome sequence, like in rank sum scoring, if one team beats the others and ranks above their counterparts, that group will defeat the other, and then there's no violation of transitivity because one group has, a chance and a defeat over that other team. And then theorem number 3, which is hopeless defects, if 2 groups, each with at least n plus 1 over 2 elements, stand within that first n plus 1 groups, transitivity is prevented or null. So for n, which is the element number, if it's odd, 2 of these groups are featured in the n plus 1 over 2 elements. And each of these groups have these elements in the top rank if they are in the top ranked subset, or if there's at least 2 groups with that number of elements in that subset, transitivity is prevented. So preventing the presence of any cycle, and those teams must defeat the third team in a pair when they compare each other, when comparing each in their elements and comparing in the entire score. So in theorem 4, we're talking about conquered or conquered. So if 2 out of the 3 groups are in the top n plus 4 of n minus 1 divided by 2 elements, transitivity is kept. So if only 2 out of the 3 groups are featured in this first element, no violation is possible. So the proof stated in the paper was that like if 2 groups whose elements are top ranked beat the third when they're comparing each other, then the one of the other 2 that beat the third one have to beat each other in another comparison. So that's when the violation is kept or precluded. So theorem number 5. So for n greater than 2, transitivity can be kept if one group's overall falls under specific beginnings, or sorry for that. So when n is greater than 2, when we're finding an overall score, it has to be shown below. I know it's a bit blocked by my video, but it shows the interval of the score between the first equation and the second. So it has to be greater than the first equation, less than the second equation, which shows the overall score. And theorem number 5 that justifies the total score using the number of elements in it if it's greater than 2.
Okay, this is Neev Chopra, and I'm talking about the rank sum scoring and the answers to the test. So there's 3 rank num scores in like all the testing. So you have n equals to 3, you have n equals to 9, and you have n equals to 5. But the most efficient one is n equals to 5 because it's not too high or too low as a value. Okay, and now the formula would be 15 factorial divided by 5 factorial divided by 3 to the power of 3. And basically this is important to know because this is like makes it 7.3 percent time faster, which is also known as computational saving, which I'll get into later. Okay, so now to begin this theory, now we first start with enumerations. And enumerations are values that just keep going in circles. Like they won't have a stopping point because like each value equals to each value, so they'll always be equal to each other. The equivalent values will never stop. They'll just keep being equal as much as you go. So as you see here, A2, A2, A1, A1, B2, then you have B2 here, then you have B1 here, you have B1 here, you have X3 here, you have X3 here, you have X2 here, you have X2 here, you have X1 here, you have X1 here. So they are equal to each other as you notice. Now each of the values they get their turn on both ways to be on the top. And if they're not on the top, the group just keeps breaking, because this is to find the top five races, not to find the top 10, but the top five. And like finding the top five, you only really need two, three groups. Okay, and as I mentioned before, it happens at 7.38% of the time, which is known as computational saving. And this is actually like a way more efficient way than anything else, because the reason why people really love this is like now in modern technology and all, like especially like in NFL, this example I'm going to get to, it they basically make it so much easier, and they use statisticians and everything and they hire them to figure out like the top five players on their team with the top speeds. It's not always about who's the best statistically, but it's also about like who's the best in the fit that they're in. So like in the races, the fit that they're in, where they're racing and everything, it all matters. So now the pressure leaders in the NFL last season. This is a great example to sum up what I'm talking about here. So here you have Micah Parsons. And now Micah Parsons, he didn't lead the NFL in sacks last year, but he still got 103 pressures. So Miles Garrett was the guy who actually led this league in sacks. And what happened was he only ended up with an 86 rating. So now if you ask a person who doesn't watch football, who is the better player, Miles Garrett or Micah Parsons? They would obviously say Miles Garrett because he has more sacks. But then the thing is, if they critically watch, if they start watching like very carefully, if they take down these notes, if they use these formulas, they use rank sum scoring and all, like how they do in races, they'll really figure out that Micah Parsons takes over games more. He's more dominant in all phases of the game as a pass rusher compared to Miles Garrett. Now, Hassan Reddick was second in the league with 16 sacks, but he only ended with an 83 score compared to someone like Max Crosby, who finished higher than him. And the reason Max Crosby finished higher than him was because Max Crosby was way more dominant. He was getting way more double teams than Hassan Reddick. And also, he was way more important to his team as he was the main defensive player compared to Hassan Reddick in the fourth or fifth for the Eagles. So, rank some scoring really makes sure that they pick the top five players on a team, on a race or something, and they figure out who is the best specifically. They don't figure out who the fastest is, who the greatest is, who the most athletic is, and automatically pick the winner. They really do their analysis before they use these formulas and everything to figure out who really can win and who's really going to win in those specific situations. Okay, now I'm going to be talking about the combination results, or like the combining results as known. So as you can see, this is an example of how a combining result looks. So they put like the number of facts implied, the number of circuit name, and like the applied facts and all the values. So the bigger the numbers usually are in these. So there's two types. First of all, they use independent and transitivity cases. So now the bigger the number is equals to the more people, resulting in a huge gain, obviously, right? So like here you can see there's 8.2068% people in this group, because the thing is it's an independent group, and also per group it has way more people. Or like when you have four groups, right? This will obviously have way more percentage because it has way more people compared to the 4.7785 or the 1.3732%. Now, the bigger the number is, the more it equals, obviously. And when you look at independence violations, they could affect the per cycle values. So, like, they're way more important than transitivity cases, because the transitivity cases don't have as much effect on like how much like a value is going to be, what the value of something's going to be, and like how much it's going to change, if it's going to have a drastic drop or increase, because independence values tend to have way more. like way more values. And now this increase in value of violations, which obviously independence cases usually have way more violations, like way more per human, is known as citrius parabusis. So this word is really key for independence violations. This is why sometimes people tend to love transitivity cases, to figure out little by little instead of going through a huge chunk of people and trying to figure out a huge percentage and trying to dissect that. And these two skills for violation testing can cause it at the same time during one test, which could cause a problem, but it could also be beneficial at the same time, because you get the best of both worlds to figure out like who really is like dominating the whole race. And the only way to for like these things to occur and like really have a meaning and value to them is ordering, because ordering takes like testing one by one by one, instead of like making like 100 groups go together and then making like 900 groups and then making 200 groups. Instead this is like going 100, so it going in chronological order so people understand better, have a better meaning. And here is a great example of how they're using chronological order, as they start with like the lowest values and then it just keeps getting greater, and everything is at 100%, 100%, in the images. Here's a picture of like the combination results. Like here's like a scientific model of how what it really means. So yeah, you can see like they're combining all the values together, and this is a chart here to explain it. This is another example of how they're combining values to really figure out like which is the best of the two, which is like the exact values that are really key to figuring out who's going to win the race, who's going to take over, which independence cases, which transitivity cases are like really important in order to figure out who's the most successful during the race. Right. So now I'm going to explain pairwise comparisons. So now pairwise comparisons, they're very similar to transitivity cases that you can see that are created. And the reason why they're really like close by is because they don't have much of an impact either. Pairwise comparisons. Pairwise comparisons are basically just like the plays that people create. Like as you can see here, this is from a pairwise comparison. This play, so like you see how all the midfielders and defenders are running forward because the ball is going like forward and like they're pushing the ball forward. So that's like the importance of pairwise comparisons, not the independent ones. The independent ones are a huge chunk, unlike the pairwise ones. So a typical answer would never be a transitivity violation creating an independent violation, because obviously like there's way fewer transitivity violations that can occur. And the reason for this also is that the thing is the independent violations, as I had mentioned before, they go in patterns. So you see how they go in chronological order from 100. It's a very rare chance, very rare case that transitivity violations will have that, but independent ones won't have that 100, 200 case where like they completely go in order. And now basically, so there's three different types of scores that they try to figure out in pairwise comparisons and these cases. So there's the maximum, the minimum, and the next scores. And the next scores are something where it can be 100% as always, and the numbers equaling 100 and adding up to 120 or any percent can always be higher and lower than that. So the thing with this is if it hits that 100%, where it equals to 120, which is 60-60 for both sides, then basically that's the perfect like right in the middle 50%. But then now if for example if you get like 100, you would get like 60-40, so then you would get like values something like probably around 60-40, so then it would be like around 80 to like 60, like it would be like 20% off. And now pairwise scores will always be the weaker group. And because see, so pairwise group, right? So it's a very strict violation group for like figuring out all these plays and everything. The problem with pairwise groups is they're not very strict. The thing with them is they don't pick up the chunk, as I mentioned, of putting groups and lists together. They basically serve like zero purpose outside of just creating plays. Coaches like being able to finish like square cross finishes or like finishing combinations for games. But outside of that, is not really mandatory, because with pairwise scores, the thing is, there's only so many examples you get, and most of them are taken away with transitivity violations. And now, if you check pairwise scores and you have like a minimum maximum, the thing is, like betting odds and all, they're created by pairwise scores. But the most important thing to realize is pairwise scores is always when you see by the statistics instead of seeing by the fit. So this is basically if like somebody had never watched sports or something and they just directly look at the stats, pairwise scores is really meant for them, and meant for like them just to get into the sport, not to like understand like why like this runner or something has finished first even though he always finishes third or fourth, and this runner finished fourth when he always finishes first. It's more of in like direct statements. So like, for example, if this person has 1,000 yards, they would expect him to have 1,000 yards the next year and be one of the best players. That's basically the importance of pairwise scores, and they are important. They're definitely very important, like for the future and everything. But and like obviously I said like in like soccer they use it for like finishing combinations and like moving the ball forward, as I said, and everything. But the real reason that like we don't really care about it so much is because the impact that each player has, it depends on who they go up against game to game. If someday they're going up against, like for football, one of the best corners, or they're going up against one of the best defenders, you could expect them to have a really poor game, or like a really good game if they're like on fire and like they've been like amazing. So that's the three types of violation numbers, and that's about it. I'm going to go over empirical results and how they basically affect the whole scheme of these tests. So again, the most important word here is citrus proboscis, and now we basically take all the results from before, the combinational results and the empirical results, and through this, where we can see here, through this we basically find that the fewer violations always come in the transitivity case, and the independent case always has way more violations. Like as we saw, 4.4%, that would be part of the transitivity case, and then the 28% would be part of the independent case. So there's three groups of five elements and four groups of five elements, having many more subgroups. So like there's gonna be plenty of subgroups in each because there's five elements. As we talked about the ranks from scoring, it goes through the top five, right? So there's going to be many subgroups within the top five to see who comes first in the top five, second in the top five, third in the top five. And this together with this, we can have the independent violations. And this independent violations, they're three times more impactful for the greater number of like the people that are racing. And it makes it way more efficient and way more faster. And it happens at zero point zero 0.01 levels of significance, which is really key. And in there being less than violations in empirical studies than the combinational results, which we can see here. Because the combinational results are basically results that make up the values of the previous studies, while empirical, they make up the values of the previous studies, but they include the empirical ones obviously, and they include the combinational ones. And as we saw in the title, they affect the broader scheme of tests. So these tests are connected towards teams with the talent level, and it doesn't create too much of a separate value between both groups. So now, why is the NCAA so smart and so efficient at finding these values and results for the empirical values? So basically, the NCAA says basically that the real distance between each racer in the test should be zero point 0.5. That's the key number. But when the NCAA did all these results, they went through the math, they went through the rank sum scoring, they ended up with the value of 0.674, which is very key, because when it's greater than, that means it's better, and when it's less than, that means that there's less efficiency in the testing. So if the value is exactly zero point 0.5, that's still there, then basically each racer who finished top 5 will basically be compared one by one in this efficiency test. So like the efficiency test is basically to test the speed. So here's an example of an efficiency test. So here is a group of 8 students, and this efficiency test is basically telling each specific key fact on who finished in the race first. It's not about the speed and who's the fastest all the time, but it's each proportion, proponent, and part of the race. So even though schools want to always give these racers like benefits and everything, they always want to like pick the best of the best in every aspect. So the first place winner is very key still, because they always get the most funding. They get the huge scholarships. They get full ride scholarships. They get more recruitment from professional teams and things like that. And the clear word for this is a robust winner. And a robust winner is like a clear winner who completely wins by a completely clear distance. So like Usain Bolt would outrun anyone. So it's basically that. And the 2011 women's track team had the lowest first place finish as robust wins, because they actually finished the closest because of this wonderful testing that ended up putting a difference of 0.674 in 2007 to 2013. And basically, of the 10 competitions between these years of 2007 to 2013, 70% of the teams actually won with a robust victory, compared to Georgetown. The Georgetown women's track team, like they came very close. Like first and second came very close to each other. And the subset match wins, they are always a result for over a million for a victory. And each team, as we can see in the chart, for the winners of all the robust victories, each team had a 95 win percentage. But this Georgetown team, they only had a 65 win percentage and they still won. So it's very key to look at all these facts, because Georgetown might have had the best individual stats, but as we talked about, schools always want to give the first place winners. Unlike what we said earlier here, schools always want to give the first place winners the most money, the most funding, and everything. So even though they get like 65% Georgetown, the thing is the 95% is very key, because the robust victories means more success for the future, and the more faster the racers can become, and the more professional they can become, and like the more talent level they have. And here's a chart of like more robust winners in a professional international track and field.